Hello Hoopaholics, it's Coach Spins here back in the film room presented by NBA Math. And today we've got a special episode for you. We're taking a deep dive into the analytics behind Hack-A-Shaq, the practice of intentionally fouling a poor free throw shooter and determining whether it is an analytically supported practice. We've seen teams employ this strategy throughout the years, starting early in the 2000s with Shaquille O'Neal, who was such a poor free throw shooter, it made more sense for defenses to dare him to make free throws than it did for them to play out the possession on defense. But what exactly is the Mendoza line for a free throw shooter to be beneath in order for a team to intentionally foul them, being a legitimate strategy? I decided to take a deep dive into this topic for NBA Math and recently published an article on the subject. This video, meant to serve as a companion to the article, details some of the analytics and the findings behind it. Besides debating its validity as a strategy, we have to talk about it from the context of the league, who has sought over the last few years to cut down on the usage and amount of Hack-A-Shaq situations that occur. Nobody wants to tune in to an NBA game during primetime in a marquee matchup between great competitive teams and see certain players simply be fouled for the sake of it being a legitimate strategy. Perhaps the most egregious violation occurred over 2.5 years ago in a game between the Pistons and the Rockets, where Houston, led by interim coach J.B. Bickerstaff, decided to intentionally foul Andre Drummond at the start of the second half for the sole purpose of driving up the team's foul count. From that point forward in the second half, the Rockets could hack Andre Drummond whenever they wanted to send him to the free throw line. Drummond ended up shooting 36 free throws in that contest. So while the league is working diligently to try to find an answer for the loophole, I sat down and wondered exactly how we can determine if fouling somebody intentionally is a strategy worth undertaking. We have to start with an understanding of what a trusted analytic baseline is for offensive performance. What we most commonly use is something called points per possession, which does just that, measures the amount of points scored based on the overall possessions that a team has throughout the course of a game. The better an offense, the better their points per possession metric will be. NBA rules dictate that, with the exception of technical fouls, any foul occurs on the court results in 2 free throw attempts. That makes the numbers for calculating points per possession fairly easy. All you do is take the free throw shooter's percentage and multiply it by 2. If they average shooting 50% from the free throw line, their average points per possession is going to be 1. So what you'll see here in the column next to the points per possession metric is essentially that number divided by 2, showing the highest possible free throw percentage that a player on that team might have in order for them to still be considered for the Hack-A-Shaq strategy. But it's not quite that simple. We have to account for free throw shooting rebounding that occurs on any missed shots. Plenty of possessions can swing back and forth based on offensive rebounding here, and that might foil the strategy altogether. So I went back and added 2 different columns into my data to account for this. The first is the half-court rebounding coefficient, which essentially averages out between the team's point per possession on putbacks and the likelihood of them getting an offensive rebound. If you want to see more of my data on how I came to the conclusions for that half-court rebounding coefficient, go read the article on NBA Math. It has a lot of great details within it. When we add the points per possession with the rebounding coefficient, we then arrive at an adjusted points per possession for each team in the half court. The second to last column in white, called rebounding coefficient, has with it the rebounding coefficient on any free throw attempt. You'll notice this number is almost half the size of the half court offense rebounding coefficient. So what does that mean? It means that missed free throws are less likely to result in an offensive rebound. When you account for the difference in rebounding coefficients, you then end up with a new free throw foul percentage that each offensive team has for their Mendoza line. You'll notice that every percentage is above 50%, which means anybody who shoots below 50% from the free throw line is a viable candidate for Hack-A-Shaq. So the overall findings will show that 10 teams have players whose free throw percentage is below the free throw foul rate suggested analytically. Exactly 1/3 of the teams in the league have a player on them that are viable for this strategy, which means we should be seeing it far more frequently than we do. Now granted, there are a ton of variables that we're not accounting for in this video that you can read more about in the article. But the larger the gap that exists between a player's free throw percentage and that team's expected foul rate, the safer we can feel about intentionally fouling that player. That means that for players like Andre Robertson of the Oklahoma City Thunder, unless they see an NBA rule change or an uptick in free throw percentage, they're going to be spending a lot more time on the free throw line. So that's it here, folks. As a college basketball coach myself, I've often wondered what the analytics might bear out for intentionally fouling poor free throw shooters. In the NBA, I've finally found my answer. And quite frankly, I'm left scratching my head, wondering why more teams don't employ the strategy. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time.